Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the last hero across the multiverse? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The dust tasted of ghosts. It was a fine, gray powder, the uniform remnant of a trillion vibrant things. It coated the skeletal ruins of UA. High, filled the empty sockets of its shattered windows, and settled like a shroud upon the lone figure perched atop the main gate. Izuku Midoriya, 28 years old and countless millennia weary, didn't bother to wipe it from his lips. The taste was a constant, a communion with the dead cosmos. Silence was his world now. Not the peaceful quiet of a library or the hushed reverence of a sleeping city, but a predatory, ontological void. It was the sound of everything having been said, every song sung, every scream silenced. The null had been thorough. It was an entropy that craved not just matter, but meaning. It didn't break worlds. It erased them, leaving behind these silent, monochrome tombstones floating in a starless void. Izuku's gloved fingers moved with an economy born of endless repetition. He was performing maintenance on his left support gauntlet, the Air Force Omega, as he'd once called it in a fit of nostalgia that now felt like a sickness. The name was a phantom limb. A memory of a girl with pink hair and zoom-lensed eyes who had designed its first iteration in a universe that no longer existed. He tightened a plasma-forged screw scavenged from the armor of a galactic knight, his movements precise and unthinking. This ritual was all that kept the madness at bay. The routine was an anchor in a sea of nothing. His face, reflected dimly in the gauntlet's polished surface, was a roadmap of lost wars. The boy who had inherited One for All was buried deep beneath a network of scars. A thin, white line bisected his right eyebrow, a gift from a feral Wolverine variant. A puckered burn mark on his cheek was a souvenir from a reality where Endeavor had fallen to a demonic Fire Lord. His freckles were still there, faint constellations on a canvas of hardened skin. But his eyes were the oldest things in existence. They were the emerald green of his youth, but filmed over with the gray dust of a million dead universes, holding the final moments of infinite heroes. He clicked the gauntlet's casing shut. The soft, metallic snick was a gunshot in the oppressive quiet. He flexed his fingers, the servomotors whining softly, a familiar mechanical hum that was more comforting than any memory. His gear was a Frankenstein's monster of forgotten genius. His boots were reinforced with metal from a world of cybernetic titans. The fabric of his costume, now a dark, utilitarian forest green bordering on black, was woven with threads that could bend light, salvaged from the invisible cloak of a long-dead alien hunter. And his mask, its angular rabbit ears shortened and reinforced, its respirator integrated with technology that could filter out conceptual despair as well as physical toxins, rested on his hip. He rarely wore it anymore. There was no one left to hide his tears from. One for All thrummed beneath his skin, a caged supernova. It was his power, his burden, his curse. At 100%, it no longer shattered his bones. His body had become a perfect vessel, tempered in the crucible of 1,000 apocalypses. He was a god of physical force, a living singularity of power. And he was utterly, cosmically useless. He had all the strength in creation, and nothing left to save. He stood, his worn boots crunching on the dusty archway of the UA gate. Below him lay the ghost of a campus. The main building was a hollowed-out carcass. The gymnasium where he'd first tested his limits against Bakugo was a collapsed ribcage of steel beams. Ground Beta, where he'd broken himself to save Ochako, was a crater filled with gray ash. A flicker. It wasn't a physical thing. It was a tremor in his memory, a glitch in the scarred tapestry of his mind. Standing here, on this specific threshold, always did this. The past was a minefield, and this was ground zero. He closed his eyes, and the silence was replaced by the cacophony of ghosts. The flashback hit him not as a gentle memory, but as a violent psychic projection. He was yanked from the gray ruins of his Earth and thrown into a world screaming with color and life. Earth 78. A reality where Katsuki Bakugo had been the one to catch All Might's eye. The city skyline was jagged and aggressive, just like its protector. Billboards didn't show All Might's smiling face. They showed the explosive, snarling visage of the #1 hero, Dynamite. His catchphrase screamed from every TV. If you're not winning, you're not trying. Now die villain. It was abrasive, terrifying, but undeniably effective. Crime was at an all-time low. People felt safe under his explosive, wrathful protection. Izuku had arrived in a flash of green lightning, a refugee from a world that had just fallen. He'd seen the hope here, the raw power of this timeline's symbol of peace. He'd tried to warn him. He'd found Bakugo atop his agency tower, arms crossed, glaring down at his city. A multiverse? And some kind of cosmic silence? This Bakugo had scoffed, his voice a low growl. He was broader, more confident than Izuku's Kaken, but the explosive arrogance was the same. TCH, you look like a sad, broken version of me, shitty Deku. Whatever it is, let it come. I'll blow it to hell, Izuku had pleaded, explained the nature of the null. It didn't fight. It consumed. It started with the subtle things, and then it began. A news chopper's report from downtown went dead mid-sentence. Not static. Just stopped. The roar of traffic from the streets below didn't lessen, it thinned, as if the very concept of sound was being unraveled. Bakugo's smirk faltered. The hell, he muttered. Then came the color. The brilliant oranges and reds of Bakugo's costume began to fade, leaching into a dull brownish gray. The vibrant sunset turned the color of week-old bruises. The null was feeding. It's here, Izuku had whispered, a cold dread coiling in his gut. We have to go. I can get us out. Bakugo, to his credit, didn't run. He snarled, a feral sound of defiance, and blasted off the tower. I don't run, Deku. I win. Izuku watched from the rooftop as Bakugo flew towards the epicenter of the advancing silence. He saw his hands cupped together, a familiar move. AP shot, howitzer impact. Izuku's mind screamed the name of the attack. He saw the massive, world-shaking explosion. He saw the flash, the incredible power that could level a city block. But he heard nothing. Not a single decibel. The explosion was a silent film, a furious, impotent flower of light that was immediately swallowed by the encroaching gray. He saw the shock on Bakugo's face, his mouth open in a scream no one would ever hear. Then, the null washed over him, and the explosive hero of Earth 78 was gone. Not dead. Erased. His existence, his concept, his heroism, all consumed. Izuku had used Black Whip to yank himself into a new dimension just as his own voice caught in his throat, the silence stealing his grief before he could even utter it. The memory receded, leaving Izuku gasping on the UA gate. He clutched his chest, his knuckles white. The pain was fresh, a wound that never scabbed over. He forced himself to breathe. In. Out. The air was thin, tasteless. He straightened up, his gaze sweeping over the dead landscape, his mind continuing its morbid pilgrimage. There was Earth Prime A, the timeline he'd once thought of as the perfect world. A reality where a lucky break, a different choice, had led to All Might defeating All for One without the career-ending injury. Izuku had arrived to find a golden age. A smiling, healthy Toshinori Yagi led a new generation of heroes. A young, quirkless Izuku Midoriya was in the support course, designing gear for his friends. It was a beautiful, painful paradise. He'd watched from the shadows, not daring to interfere. Then the null had come. He'd watched his mentor, in his prime, punch with the force of a hurricane, and have the shockwave simply dissolve into nothing. He saw the confusion, the terror in his idol's eyes as the power he'd always relied on was rendered meaningless. All Might's final words, "What is this?" were stolen from his lips before his form faded into the gray miasma. Izuku had fled, the image of All Might's silent, horrified face burned into his soul. Then there was Earth Omega, a world of gritty, quirkless vigilantes. A brilliant detective who dressed as a bat, a billionaire genius in a suit of armor, a super soldier who was the pinnacle of human potential. They had no powers, only their will, their minds, and their gadgets. They were proof that heroism wasn't dependent on quirks. And the null had taken them, too. It had unwritten the code of their computers, silenced the roar of their engines, and turned their indomitable wills into fading whispers. Theirs was a slow, agonizing defeat, a testament to their stubbornness, but a defeat nonetheless. He had tried. Gods, how he had tried. He had fought alongside demigods, space wizards, and green-skinned rage monsters. He had coordinated with armies, planned with tactical geniuses, and pushed One for All to levels its creators could never have imagined. But you couldn't punch entropy. You couldn't Detroit smash a concept. He was the multiverse's strongest fist, swinging at a fog that simply parted and reformed around him. His only victory was survival. A victory that tasted like ash. A soft, feminine voice echoed in the private sanctuary of his mind, the space where his predecessors resided. Izuku. That's enough. He let out a shaky breath. The mental space of One for All. A vast, dark room, with 8 thrones. Most were empty. The consciousnesses of the vestiges were fading, their energy frayed by the unending despair. Only the strongest, the most stubborn, remained as faint, translucent specters. She's right, ninth, a gruff, clipped voice added. It was the second user, Kudo. His form was barely more than a shimmer of light, his spiky hair and sharp features like a half-finished sketch. Dwelling on the lost accomplishes nothing. Situational awareness. Focus on the now. Easy for you to say, the third Bruce chimed in, his own form just as faint. You're not the one wearing the skin. The silence gets to you. We feel it too. Izuku walked through the mental landscape, approaching the throne where a woman's form was the most solid. Nana Shimura. Her black bodysuit and white cape were ethereal, but her warm, sad smile was almost real. She was his anchor in this inner world. It's not a weakness to grieve, Izuku, she said gently, reaching out a spectral hand. He couldn't feel its touch, but he felt the intention, the warmth. But you carried the grief of a billion worlds. No single soul was meant for that. It would break you. It's all I have left of them, Izuku replied, his thought a weary whisper in the shared space. The memory. The pain. It's proof they existed. A great, looming shadow sat on the throne next to Nana's. All Might. His vestige was a paradox. It was the strongest, being the most recent and powerful user before Izuku, but it was also the one Izuku could barely stand to look at. The ghost of his mentor, forever trapped in his prime, muscle-bound form, was a constant, searing reminder of his greatest failure. The vestige of Tashinori Yagi rarely spoke. It simply watched Izuku with eyes full of a terrible, silent sorrow. The power is a prison now, isn't it? Yoichi Shigaraki, the first, spoke. His voice was the faintest of all, a rustle of dry leaves. His form was a will-o'-the-wisp, a flickering candle in a hurricane. This power was meant to be passed on, to nurture, to grow. Now, it has nowhere to go. It is a star collapsing in on itself. On you, it's what keeps me alive, Izuku insisted, his voice raw. It's the only reason the null hasn't taken me. Survival is not living, Nana said, her voice aching with maternal pity. What are you surviving for, my dear boy? That was the question, wasn't it? The one he asked himself every time he woke from his fitful, nightmare-choked sleep. For years, the answer had been to find a way to fight back. Then, to save just one more world. Then, to find other survivors. Now, the answers had all run out. He was a machine executing its final, pointless function, endure. I need to check the relays, Izuku stated, pulling himself from the mental space. The vestige's voices faded. He was alone again. The chronoton regulator on my primary scanner is fluctuating. I need parts. He didn't need to say where he was going. There was only one place left on this dead earth that might have what he needed. The former pinnacle of scientific achievement, Island. The journey was a grim parody of his youthful dreams of flight. There was no joy, no soaring. He activated float, lifting silently into the thin, gray atmosphere. Then, with a controlled burst from One for All at 20%, he launched himself eastward. Black whip tendrils, thick as pythons, shot from his arms, not to swing from buildings, but to stabilize his trajectory, acting as microthrusters and ailerons. He streaked across the sky, a dark comet over a dead world. He flew over the Pacific, or what was left of it. The water wasn't blue. It was a sheet of still, dark gray glass, its surface undisturbed by wind or tide. The concepts of wave and current had been consumed. He saw the ghostly outlines of whales and sharks, frozen in the depths, their forms slowly dissolving like sugar in water. In less than an hour, the skeletal remains of Island appeared on the horizon. The iconic central tower was a jagged spear of twisted metal, its top half sheared away. The bridges connecting the artificial island to the mainland were collapsed, looking like the broken teeth of some great sea monster. He landed without a sound in what used to be the main plaza. The I logo, vast and made of inlaid marble, was cracked and covered in the ubiquitous gray dust. Here, he had worn a tuxedo, been awkward and flustered, and fought alongside his mentor. Here, he had met Melissa Shield. His heart gave a painful throb. He had visited her universe, Earth 217, in his desperate flight. He'd found her as the head of a global support item conglomerate, her genius having ushered in an era of heroic safety and efficiency. She had recognized him instantly, a paradox, a ghost from her father's past. She had given him the plans for his current gauntlets, the Omega model, before her world, too, was silenced. He had promised to come back for her. Another broken promise. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the mission. Scavenge, repair, endure, he muttered, the words a hollow mantra. He made his way towards the ruins of the main research laboratory, the place he remembered Melissa working. His boots crunched over shattered glass and buckled durasteel. Inside, the labs were a chaotic mess. Papers were fused into solid blocks, computer terminals were dark and lifeless, and advanced support items lay in pieces, their inner workings exposed like dissected animals. He found her old workshop, or what he guessed was it. A full gauntlet poster, its colors faded to near monochrome, was still miraculously clinging to a wall. This was the place. He began to search, his eyes scanning the debris with practiced efficiency. He was looking for a pre-quark-era chronoton array, or a quantum entanglement board. The null was less effective against older, simpler technologies. It fed on complexity, on potential. Sometimes, analog was salvation. After nearly an hour of careful, methodical searching, he found it. Tucked inside a lead-lined case under a pile of rubble was a shoebox-sized device, a first-generation quantum positioning system. It was ancient by the standards of the worlds he'd seen, but its core contained a chronoton stabilizer made of a non-reactive crystalline alloy. Perfect. He knelt, pulling the device from its case. He had his own multi-tool, another piece of cobbled-together genius. With deft movements, he began to disassemble the casing, his focus absolute. And that's when it happened. On his belt, next to his medkit, was a small, ugly box. It was the heart of his multiversal odyssey, a device he'd built himself from the schematics of a dozen different refugee scientists. A multiversal resonance scanner. For years, its screen had displayed a single, depressing image, a flat, horizontal line. The line of total silence. The ECG of a dead multiverse. It was his proof of solitude. A flicker, a tiny, pinprick of green light blinked on the device's obsidian dark screen. Izuka froze, his multi-tool hovering over a screw. He stared. It had to be a malfunction. A power surge from One for All. A dying capacitor. He hadn't seen a light on that screen in, he couldn't remember, centuries, subjectively. It blinked again. Green. The color of hope. The color of his own eyes. Then a sound. It was not the wind, which did not exist. It was not the groan of dying metal. It was a clean, pure, electronic tone. Beep. The sound was so alien, so pristine, that it struck Izuka with the force of a physical blow. He dropped the multi-tool, which clattered onto the dusty floor, the noise obscenely loud in the utter silence. He scrambled to unclip the scanner from his belt, his hands shaking so violently he could barely manage the clasp. He held the box in his trembling palms. The screen, which had been a flat line for ages, now showed a single, perfect sine wave, pulsing in time with the beeps. Beep. It was a signal. A repeating, rhythmic energy pulse. It was simple, structured. It was deliberate. Beep. It was impossible. He had scanned every known frequency, every dimensional spectrum. There was nothing. There was only him. There was only the null. Beep. His mind raced. A trap? Was the null evolving? Creating a lure? A final, sophisticated torture designed to break his spirit with false hope. The second and third users were screaming warnings in his head, a litany of tactical suspicion. It's a feint. A honey trap. Ignore it. But Nana was silent. An All Might's sorrowful shade seemed to lean forward, its spectral form flickering with an energy he hadn't seen in eons. Izuku's thumb hovered over the device's main display. With a shaky, indrawn breath, he tapped the screen. The sine wave was replaced by a string of characters, a coordinate. But it wasn't a spatial coordinate. It wasn't a temporal one. It was a string of quantum variables and conceptual alignments that pointed to a location outside of the recognized structure of the multiverse. A place that shouldn't exist. An impossibility. Beep. He stared at the pulsing light, at the impossible coordinates, and felt something he hadn't felt in a lifetime. It was a terrifying, agonizing, and excruciatingly beautiful sensation. It started as a flicker in the cold, dead furnace of his chest, and then it sparked, threatening to catch fire. It was hope, and as he stood there in the ruins of a forgotten age, holding a message from nowhere, the last hero in a dead multiverse allowed himself a single, crystalline tear to trace a clean path through the gray dust on his cheek. The silence was no longer absolute. There was an echo. And he had to find its source. The beep was a chisel, chipping away at the marble monolith of silence he had inhabited for centuries. Beep. Izuku's hands, which had faced down gods and monsters without a tremor, now shook so violently the small scanner rattled in his grip. The single, pulsing green dot on the screen was an impossible star in a sky he knew was empty. The sine wave it generated was a perfect, elegant rhythm against the flat line of a dead reality. He felt like a deep-sea diver, submerged in crushing darkness for a lifetime, suddenly seeing a flicker of sunlight from the surface. The pressure in his chest was immense, a mixture of agonizing hope and profound terror. He sank to his knees in the gray dust of the island, oblivious to the sharp fragments of glass and metal beneath him. His breath hitched, a dry, ragged sound. The device felt impossibly heavy, a neutron star of potentiality in his palms. Beep. His first coherent thought was a tactical assessment, a reflex burned into his soul by 1,000 lost battles. It's a trap. The conclusion was as immediate as it was soul-crushing. The null was a sentient form of entropy. It had consumed beings of cosmic intellect, entities that could rewrite reality with a thought. For it to miss a signal this clean, this obvious, it was illogical. It was a lure. A piece of cheese in a cosmic mousetrap, and he was the last, starving mouse. His internal world flared to life, the vestiges roused by the sudden shift in his emotional state. The dark, throne room in his mind became a war council. A signal, the second user, Kudo, stated, his voice sharp and immediate. His spectral form, usually a faint glimmer, sharpened with alarm. Ninth, analyze. The frequency is simple, a basic pulse wave. The energy signature is low, almost negligible. It's designed to be found. It's bait. He's right, the third Bruce added, his own ghostly outline solidifying beside Kudo's. He was the pragmatist, the realist. We've seen the null adapt. It learned to counter psionic attacks after encountering the Phoenix hosts of Earth 834. It developed resistances to temporal paradoxes after the war with the Time Lords. It's not a mindless force. It's a predator. It's learned that you always run towards the smallest flicker of hope. This is it. This is the final move to corner you. Izuku's own logic screamed in agreement. It was too simple. Too perfect. A single, repeating signal that his cobbled-together scanner, a device built from the scraps of a dozen fallen civilizations, could just happen to pick up. It was a script, and he knew how stories like this ended. The hero, desperate for a reprieve, walks into the villain's final gambit and is destroyed. He looked down at the scanner, at the pulsing green light. His thumb drifted to the power switch. He could turn it off. He could crush the device under his heel, grind it into the same gray dust as everything else. He could return to the silence, to the grim certainty of his solitude. It would be safer. It would be logical. It would be a surrender. But what if it isn't? The voice was Nana Shimura's, soft but firm, cutting through the tactical paranoia of the others. Her form shimmered with a gentle light, her dark hair and white cape a stark contrast to the gloom of the mental space. She stood before her throne, not sitting, her posture radiating a defiant belief. What if, after all this time, one thing survived? One last effort from people as desperate and brilliant as Melissa, or May, or any of the countless geniuses we saw fall? What if this isn't a trap from the null, but a message in a bottle thrown into the void, and you, Izuku, are the only one left on the shore to find it? The odds are astronomically against it. 7th, Kudo countered, his tone frustrated. Hope is not a strategy. We have one asset left, the 9th's life. We cannot wager it on a feeling. He's right, Nana, Izuku thought, his own voice a weary echo in his mind. My survival is the only victory I have left. To risk it on a beep. His voice trailed off. Even as he said it, the words tasted like lies. What kind of victory was this? To be the last living cell in a body that was already dead? To be the keeper of a graveyard? Then what is the point? Nana's voice rose, filled with the passion that had once made her a symbol of hope. Tell me, Kudo. Tell me, Izuku. What is the point of enduring? To sit on a dead world and polish your armor until the end of time? To be a lonely god ruling over an empire of dust? One for All was never about survival. It was about saving people. It was about lighting a candle when all other lights go out. This signal, this beep, it is the first flicker of a candle we have seen in 1,000 years. And you want to snuff it out for the sake of strategy? Her words struck him harder than any physical blow. They bypassed the grizzled soldier and hit the boy underneath, the one who had rushed headlong into the sludge villain, his legs moving before he could think. Heroism, at its core, was an illogical act. It was defying the odds. It was choosing to act when survival dictated you should flee. He had been a survivor for so long, he'd forgotten how to be a hero. The nature of the signal is curious, a new voice whispered, thin as spider silk. It was Yoichi, the first. His wispy form flickered near the edge of the room, a fragile flame against the crushing dark. The null consumes meaning. It feeds on complexity, potential, and purpose. This signal, in its simplicity, has a clear purpose, to be heard. It is an act of communication. It is, by its very definition, a pocket of pure, unadulterated meaning in a cosmos that has been rendered meaningless. It is antithetical to everything the null represents. That alone makes it significant. Izuku looked from the frantic warnings of the 2nd and 3rd to the passionate plea of the 7th, and the philosophical observation of the 1st. He then turned his mental gaze to the last occupied throne, the hulking, magnificent form of All Might. The vestige hadn't spoken, but Izuku could feel the change in him. The suffocating aura of sorrow that usually clung to him had lessened. His spectral head was lifted, his unseen eyes fixed on the same point in the distance as Izuku's. For the first time in centuries, the ghost of his mentor looked less like a monument to failure and more like a hero waiting for the bell to ring. The decision solidified in Izuku's heart, a core of warmth spreading through his chest. Kudo and Bruce were right. It was probably a trap. But Nana and Yoichi were also right. It was the only meaningful thing left. To ignore it was to accept the finality of the null's victory. To agree that hope was dead and survival was all that remained. No, Izuku whispered aloud, his voice cracking in the silent air of the island. No. I won't. He stood up, his body aching but his spirit feeling lighter than it had in ages. He looked at the impossible coordinates on the scanner. 9th. Izuku, don't be a fool, Kudo pleaded, a genuine note of fear in his voice. I'm not being a fool, Izuku thought back, his resolve hardening into adamantium. I'm being a hero. Maybe for the last time. He clenched his fist, the faint green spark of One for All flickering over his knuckles. If this is a trap, if this is where it all ends, then I'm going to go down swinging at something instead of fading away into nothing. I owe them that much. He owed it to the ghost of Bakugo, who had died screaming silent defiance. He owed it to the shade of All Might, who had faced the void with confusion but not fear. He owed it to Melissa, to May, to Ochako, to Ida, to all the infinite versions of the people he had loved and lost. He would not let his final act be one of cowardice. He secured the scanner to his belt, took one last look at the ruins of the laboratory, and turned his face to the empty, starless sky. He had no destination universe in mind. This time, he wasn't fleeing to somewhere. He was jumping at the coordinates themselves. A blind leap into a conceptual space. Taking a deep, grounding breath, he crouched low. Power, raw and immense, surged through him. The gray dust around his boots swirled into miniature cyclones of green lightning. 10%, 20%, 50%. The power climbed. His muscles swelled, his veins glowing with emerald light. This wasn't the controlled burst he used for travel. This was a brute force application. He was about to break the rules. With a guttural roar that tore through the silence, he leaped. Not up, but forward. In midair, he cocked his fist back. Tendrils of black whip erupted from his body, not as grappling hooks, but as anchors, latching onto the very fabric of spacetime around him. He pulled, creating a point of immense gravitational and dimensional stress directly in front of him. Smash! His fist connected with nothing and everything. Reality fractured. It didn't open like a door. It shattered like a pane of glass struck by a meteor. A web of brilliant green cracks spread across the gray void, and with a sound like a billion crystals breaking at once, his universe tore open. On the other side was not a new world, but a chaotic, terrifying torrent of unspace. The multiversal graveyard. He plunged into it without hesitation. The transition was sickening. It felt like being turned inside out and reassembled incorrectly. Colors that had no name flashed before his eyes. Physics bent and warped. For a moment, he felt his own mass become infinite and zero at the same time. But his iron will, forged in the heart of apocalypses, held his form together. He oriented himself in the chaos, using float to stabilize his position in the swirling void. He was in a cemetery of realities, a cosmic landfill of dead worlds. Ghostly Earths, some shattered, some scorched, some simply dark and inert, drifted past him like forgotten thoughts. The silence here was different. It was older, deeper. It was the silence of eternity. He checked the scanner. The beep was stronger here, the coordinates resolving. He had a heading. Igniting a faint green thruster-like glow from his feet, he began his journey. The first world he passed was the one that always haunted his nightmares the most. He called it Chrysalis. The planet was intact, but its surface glittered. He drifted closer, a morbid moth to a dead flame. A city was frozen in time, its inhabitants turned to translucent, shimmering crystal. He saw them mid-stride, mid-scream, mid-embrace. And on a plaza, a team of heroes was caught in their final moment. A figure like Superman, cape flowing, hand outstretched to the sky, his face a mask of crystalline agony. A woman wreathed in psychic energy, her hands pressed to her temples as if trying to hold back an ocean of despair. They were beautiful, terrifying statues in a museum of failure. The null hadn't just killed them, it had turned them into a monument of their own defeat. Izuku averted his gaze, a familiar coldness seeping into his bones. He flew on, the scanners beep a lonely heartbeat in the void. He passed what looked like a flat, circular disk of a world, carried on the backs of 4 colossal elephants standing on the shell of a giant turtle, all of it now gray, still, and lifeless. Then he saw it. A broken rainbow. It was the Bifrost. Or what was left of it. The majestic bridge of light that connected realms was shattered, its once vibrant colors leached into dull, pastel shades of gray. Great chunks of it floated aimlessly in the void. Beyond the ruin of the bridge lay the ghost of a golden city, a disk of impossible architecture floating in space. Asgard. He drifted through its silent streets. The grand feasting hall was empty, its long tables covered in a thick carpet of dust. He floated up to the throne room and saw it. Hlidskjaf, Odin's throne, from which the All-Father could see all that transpired in the 9 realms. It was empty, a lonely chair looking out over a kingdom of nothing. He saw a great hammer, Mjolnir, lying on the ground, its inscription, "Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor," now just a meaningless scrawl on a lump of dead Yaryu metal. The concept of worthiness had been eaten along with everything else. The loss of such a bastion of power, of mythology made real, felt particularly profound. It was a testament to the null's horrifying totality. He pushed onward, the journey a relentless assault on his soul. Each dead world was a verse in an epic poem of loss, and he was the only one left to read it. He was the curator, the witness, the mourner for all of creation. The scanner beeped faster. He was getting closer. The coordinates led him towards a familiar-looking Earth, one shrouded in an unnatural, perpetual twilight. As he entered its atmosphere, a strange symbol was faintly illuminated in the gloom, a bat-like shape projected against the dark, heavy clouds. Gotham. Earth 9. He landed on the rooftop of the Gotham City Police Department, his boots making no sound. The bat signal projector was still there, a faint, weary beam cutting into the sky. It was on its last legs, its power source almost depleted, a final, defiant gasp of a city that had always lived in the dark. This place felt different. Asgard was a tragedy of gods. Chrysalis was a horror story. Gotham was a personal grief. He had met its protector, a grim, determined man with no powers, only a brilliant mind and an unbreakable will. The Batman of this world had been one of the few who had truly understood the nature of the null when Izuku explained it. He hadn't dismissed it. He had retreated to his cave and begun working on a countermeasure, a conceptual weapon. He hadn't been fast enough. Izuku walked to the edge of the rooftop, looking down at the silent city. The architecture was oppressive Gothic. Stone gargoyles, their faces twisted in silent screams, seemed to watch him from every ledge. He had seen them fight. The Dark Knight, his Robins, the Batgirl. They were a family, a small, flickering candle of order in a hurricane of chaos. He remembered the Batman's final message to him, transmitted across the dimensional barrier just before his world went dark. It wasn't a plea for help. It was data. Analysis. A theory on the null's weakness. It was a final, selfless act of a hero trying to help the fight even as he was being consumed by it. He leaped from the roof, using float to drift down into a deserted alleyway. The air was thick with the smell of old rain and decay. On a brick wall, almost completely faded, was a splash of purple and green graffiti. A chaotic, grinning smile and the words, "Was here." The name itself, the concept of the Joker, had been partially erased, eaten by the silence. The null consumed even the chaos that opposed the order of heroes. It consumed everything. This journey was solidifying something in his mind. The risk he was taking wasn't just justified, it was necessary. To stay idle was to become one of these ghosts, a silent monument to what was. He had to move forward. He had to honor the Batman's data, Thor's strength, Bakugo's defiance. He had to honor the hope he was starting to feel. He launched himself back into the void, leaving the dying bat signal behind. The scanner's beeping was a constant, frantic pulse now. The coordinates were practically on top of him. Yet he saw nothing. He was floating in a patch of absolute, featureless black. It was darker than the space between worlds. It felt wrong. Raw. It was a tear in the tapestry, a place where no reality had ever been stitched into existence. The graveyard was a place of things that had died. This was a place of things that had never been born. The scanner's screen showed a single, blinking word under the coordinates. Arrived. He was here. And there was nothing. It's a dead end. 9th, Kudo's voice was grim. A ghost signal. An echo with no source. We turned back. Now, Izuku ignored him. He held the scanner, turning in a slow circle. The signal was uniform from all directions. It wasn't coming from a point in this space. It was emanating from this space itself. It was all around him. He closed his eyes. Nana's words came back to him. A message in a bottle. The Batman's data. Conceptual weaknesses. Yoichi's observation. A pocket of pure meaning. It wasn't a dead end. It was a lock. The signal wasn't a destination, it was a key. The space wasn't empty, it was hidden. Shielded. It was a pocket dimension, folded away outside of normal spacetime so that the null, which traveled through universes, couldn't perceive it. You couldn't just fly to it. You had to be invited, or you had to have the key, and even then, you had to force the door. Okay, he said to the void, a grim smile touching his lips. Knock, knock. He took a deep breath and let one for all flood his senses. This time, he pulled on everything. The strength of all might. The tenacity of Nana. The speed of the fourth. The pragmatism of the second and third. the hope of the first. All 8 previous users, their wills, their power, their history, surged into his right arm. Green lightning, brighter and more intense than he had summoned in centuries, coiled around him, illuminating the void. The raw power was a sun in the darkness. He felt the memories of his own greatest hits. The 1,000,000% Delaware-Detroit smash against Muscular, the final punch against Shigaraki, the countless blows he'd struck against the encroaching silence. He channeled all of it, all the desperation, all the grief, all the stubborn, stupid hope that had just been reignited. He cocked his fist back, his entire body a drawn bowstring of cosmic power. "This is for everyone!" he roared, his voice the first true sound in this non-space. Detroit. Smash! He didn't punch a planet. He didn't punch a villain. He punched reality itself. His fist connected with the absolute nothingness in front of him. The result was not an explosion. It was a sound. A sound in a place where sound couldn't travel. It was the chime of a billion bells, the cracking of a glacier, and the sigh of a locked door finally giving way, all at once. The empty space before him fractured. Not like the chaotic shattering from before, but with perfect, geometric precision. A hairline crack of pure white light appeared in the void. It spread, branching out like a crystalline frost pattern on a windowpane. The cracks widened, the light pouring out, not harsh or violent, but clean, warm, and inviting. Then, the fractured pieces of the void fell away like discarded shards of obsidian, revealing what they had been concealing. It was a doorway. A shimmering, rectangular portal of silver and gold light, humming with a quiet, stable energy that felt like the antithesis of the null's creeping dread. It was pristine, elegant, and utterly alien to the decay and ruin of the graveyard he had just traveled through. Izuku floated before it, his arm throbbing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. One for all receded, leaving him feeling drained but exhilarated. The scanner in his hand fell silent, its job done. The doorway was the source. Through the shimmering portal, he couldn't see a world. He saw only clean, white light and the faint suggestion of gleaming, advanced architecture. "My boy." The voice of All Might's vestige whispered in his mind, filled with an emotion so profound it was almost overwhelming. It was all. Izuku Midoriya, the last hero, floated in the graveyard of a dead multiverse, before a door that shouldn't exist. He had made his choice. He had wagered his life on a feeling, and for the first time in 1,000 years, it seemed the universe hadn't called his bluff. Taking one last look back at the endless, silent dark, he turned, straightened his back, and flew forward. With a deep breath that felt like his first, he crossed the threshold, leaving the ghost dimension behind and stepping into the unknown. The transition was not a step, but a surrender. One moment, Izuku was suspended in the absolute nothingness of the multiversal graveyard. The next, he was absorbed by the shimmering portal. There was no vertigo, no violent pressure, only a profound sense of arrival. He drifted through the threshold of light, and found himself standing on solid ground. The first thing that struck him was the air. It was cool, clean, and carried the faint, sterile scent of ozone and energized circuits. He took a breath, and it didn't taste of dust or despair. It tasted of nothing, a pure, pristine neutrality that was more shocking than any flavor. He was breathing air that hadn't been filtered through the lungs of the dead and dying. The second thing was the light. It was everywhere, a soft, sourceless white luminescence that emanated from the walls, the floor, and the impossibly high ceiling. There were no bulbs, no suns, just a gentle, ambient glow that left no shadows. It was the light of a surgeon's theater scaled to the size of a cathedral. He stood in a vast, circular chamber. The floor beneath his worn boots was a seamless expanse of a pearl-white material that felt like polished ceramic but yielded slightly under his weight, absorbing the sound of his landing. The walls curved away from him, rising to a height his eyes couldn't measure, fading into the light of the ceiling. The surface of the walls wasn't static. It rippled with slow, hypnotic waves of silver data, flowing in intricate patterns like a digital river. He was a smudge of dirt in a sterile environment. His dark, patched costume, stained with the grime of 100 dead worlds, felt like a sacrilege here. He reflexively checked his gear, his hand resting on the hilt of a survival knife. His senses, honed by centuries of paranoia, screamed at him. This place was too clean, too quiet. It was the calm at the eye of a hurricane, and he was conditioned to expect the storm. Ninth, where are we? Kudo's voice was a tense whisper in his mind, the second user's ingrained suspicion clashing with the sheer impossibility of their surroundings. Scans. Energy readings. Life science. Izuku's eyes, which had grown accustomed to scanning desolate ruins and shattered landscapes, now swept the chamber, trying to find a threat, a weakness, a point of entry or exit. He found none. There were no doors, no windows, only the continuous, data-laced walls. He was in a bottle. But this silence was different from the null's. The null's silence was an absence, a void where sound had been murdered. This was a functional quiet, the low, almost subliminal hum of immense power held in perfect stasis. It was the sound of a supercomputer dreaming. At the precise center of the chamber, dominating the space, was the source of that hum. The object from the outline. It was a massive, intricate device, easily the size of a city bus stood on its end. It wasn't a machine of gears and pistons, but of impossible geometry and light. A central, crystalline sphere, dark and dormant, was held in place by a series of interlocking golden rings that floated around it without any visible support. The rings were covered in etchings, a language of pure mathematics and quantum symbols that Izuku's mind couldn't begin to decipher. Thin, ethereal filaments of light occasionally arced between the rings and the central sphere, like dormant synapses. The entire structure pulsed with a slow, rhythmic, almost biological beat of latent energy. What is that thing? Izuku muttered aloud, his voice sounding small and rough in the vast, clean space. It's beautiful, Nana Shimura whispered in his mind, her usual warmth tinged with profound awe. It feels purposeful. As he took a cautious step towards the central device, the chamber responded. The flow of silver data on the walls intensified, converging on a point directly in front of him. Particles of light, like dust motes caught in a sunbeam, began to flow from the walls and floor, coalescing in midair. They swirled and spun, weaving together into a tapestry of blue and white energy. In seconds, the light solidified, forming a shape. It was a figure, vaguely humanoid, standing 10 feet tall. It had no discernible face, hair, or clothing, its form composed entirely of shifting, geometric patterns of light. It was androgynous, elegant, and radiated an intelligence so vast it felt like a physical pressure. It was not threatening, merely present. Izuku immediately dropped into a low, ready stance, one for all crackling over his fists, a vibrant green against the sterile white of the room. Who are you? He demanded, his voice a low growl. The being of light did not move, but a voice emanated from it, filling the chamber. The voice was the most complex thing Izuku had ever heard. It was a chorus and a solo at once, 1,000 distinct voices, male, female, young, old, human, and alien, all speaking in perfect, calm unison. It was the sound of a committee of geniuses. Welcome, traveler, the voice said, the harmony so perfect it was almost musical. You may call me Deadless. I am the caretaker of this facility. The Nexus. The Nexus? Izuku repeated, not relaxing his stance. Who built this place? And how do you know my language? We have been monitoring all dimensional frequencies for a potential candidate. Your language, along with 3.14 trillion others, was part of the initial data cache, Deadless explained, its voice patient, as if speaking to a child. This place, the Nexus, was constructed by a coalition, the greatest minds from 7,108 different universes, united by a single, desperate purpose. They were the architects. The silver data on the walls behind Deadless shifted, forming images. Izuku saw faces he recognized, and countless more he didn't. A brilliant woman with pink dreadlocks and excited, zoom-lensed eyes, a version of Mei Hatsum. A blonde woman with glasses, her expression radiating intelligence and kindness, a version of Melissa Shield. A man with a trimmed goatee and an amulet glowing on his chest. A blue-skinned, forearmed being manipulating holographic equations, an entity that appeared to be a living nebula contained within a suit of crystalline armor. The architects, all of them, Izuku knew with a sickening certainty, were gone now, consumed by the null. The architects saw the coming of the null, Deadless continued, its form rippling. They understood its nature, an entropic cascade, a sentient void feeding on the conceptual energy of existence, hope, heroism, potential, love. They knew it could not be fought. You cannot punch a conclusion. You cannot blast the fundamental theorem of a dying cosmos. Izuku flinched. The AI's words mirrored his own grim discovery, a truth he had paid for with the lives of infinite friends. So they ran, Izuku said, a bitter edge to his voice. They built this place and hid. Incorrect, Daedalus replied, its tone unwavering. There was no running. The null is inevitable. It permeates all of space-time. The architects did not build a fortress. They built a lifeboat. The data on the walls shifted again, showing a simulation. A vast ocean of black, churning chaos, representing the null. Then, a small, glowing sphere, the nexus, was shown detaching itself from the fabric of the ocean, existing outside of it, a bubble of reality in the unspace where Izuku had found it. The nexus is a pocket dimension, stabilized outside the causal structure of the multiverse. It was designed to weather the storm, to endure until the great silence was absolute. It is a time capsule, a message in a bottle. But it is more than a shelter. A lifeboat is useless without a destination. Daedalus gestured with an arm of flowing light towards the massive device at the center of the room. The golden rings around the dark sphere began to rotate slowly, emitting a low, harmonic chime. The architects could not save the old world, the AI said, its thousand-voice chorus tinged with a faint echo of its creator's sorrow. The canvas of reality was already being erased, so they created a new one. A blank canvas, and a single seed of paint. Izuku stared at the machine, his mind reeling. A new canvas? You mean, a new universe? Precisely. That is the Genesis seed. Within that central chronosynclastic sphere are the foundational patterns of a single, new reality. The laws of physics, the constants of nature, the base code for abiogenesis. Even, the potential for meta-abilities. 4 quirks, hope, fierce and blinding, surged through Izuku. It was so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. A new universe. A new start. A world free from the null, a place for life to begin again. After all the death, all the endings, here was a beginning. Activate it, Izuku said, his voice thick with emotion. He straightened up, his fists unclenching. Do it now! What are you waiting for? The light within Daedalus's form seemed to dim for a moment. The architects completed the seed, but they lacked one final, crucial component, the power source. The energy required to ignite a new Big Bang, to unfold a new dimension from a single point, is astronomical. It is an energy expenditure that would make a supernova look like a flickering candle. Izuku's heart sank. Of course. The final, insurmountable obstacle. So it's a failure. Another beautiful, useless machine. The bitterness returned, sharp and familiar. It is not a failure, Daedalus countered calmly. It is simply incomplete. The architects calculated the required energy. They could not generate it, but they could design a lock for a key they predicted would one day exist. They did not need a static power source. They needed a dynamic one, a power that was not merely immense, but one that grew over time, that stockpiled energy, that was passed from host to host, accumulating not just power but will, experience, and purpose. The words hung in the sterile air. Izuku's blood ran cold. The vestiges in his mind, who had been listening in a mixture of awe and suspicion, fell into a stunned, absolute silence. A power that grows over time, passed from host to host, accumulating not just power but will. Every phrase was a hammer blow, forging a chain of logic that was wrapping itself around his soul. His gaze drifted from the Genesis seed to his own hands. The hands that crackled with green lightning, the hands that held the culmination of 9 generations of sacrifice. No, he whispered, a denial born of pure horror. It's not possible. The architects called it a singularity quirk, Daedalus stated, its voice devoid of emotion, a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. A theoretical power that could, over generations, breach the limits of its own reality and accumulate near infinite energy. They hypothesized its existence in at least one timeline, They built the Genesis Seed's ignition system to be compatible with only one energy signature in all of creation. Daedalus's form of light turned, its featureless face fixing directly on Izuku. The thousand voices spoke a single, universe-shattering name, one for all. The air was sucked from Izuku's lungs. The world tilted on its axis. The quiet hum of the Nexus faded into a deafening roar in his ears. It wasn't a trap by the null. It was something far more terrifying. It was a purpose. A final, terrible purpose for his existence. Me? He croaked, his voice barely audible. You want my quirk? We do not want it. Izuku Midoriya, ninth user of One for All, Daedalus corrected him gently. The Genesis Seed requires it. It was designed for it. You are not a random survivor. You are the key the architects were waiting for. A dizzying, hysterical laugh bubbled up in Izuku's throat. He choked it back, the sound turning into a ragged cough. He had thought himself the multiverse's janitor, its undertaker. But he was just a delivery boy, carrying a power source across a dead cosmos, relief and horror warred within him. The choice was simple. The path was clear. He could do it. He could give his power, his burden, to this machine and create a new future. He could finally win. Then let's do it, he said, stepping forward, his resolve hardening. Tell me what I need to do. I'll pour every last drop into it. The light of Daedalus's form dimmed again, a gesture he was beginning to associate with terrible news. Your willingness is commendable. It is the final confirmation of the architect's hypothesis about the nature of the ninth user. But you must understand the totality of the cost. I understand, Izuku said impatiently. It'll take the power. I get it. You do not, Daedalus stated, its voice losing its chorus-like quality for a moment, becoming a sterner, singular tone. This is not like passing the quirk to a successor. This is not a transfer. It is a consumption. The Genesis Seed will not just take the stockpiled energy. It will take the core, the mechanism, the very concept of One for All. It will drain you until nothing remains. Izuku stared, his bravado evaporating. What do you mean, nothing remains? You will be left with the embers. A faint, residual echo of the connection, but the fire will be gone. The power that allows you to shatter mountains, to leap across voids, to speak with the minds of your predecessors, all of it will be gone. You will have the normal, physical potential of a human male of your age and conditioning, but the power itself, One for All, will cease to exist within you. The words hammered into him, one by one. The fire will be gone. The vestiges, gone. Effectively quirkless. The silence in his own mind was the most terrifying part. The vestiges were reeling. He could feel their shock, their collective consciousness flickering like a candle in a gale. Nana, Kudo, Yoichi, even All Might. They weren't just his advisors, they were his companions. His only family for longer than he could remember. To lose them, that was a pain he hadn't imagined was possible. And the power, One for All, was more than a tool. It was his skin. It was the armor that had protected him from the horrors of the void. It was the strength that let him stand where others had fallen. It was the legacy of his idol, the proof that he was worthy. It was the very thing that defined him. Without it, what was he? He would be just Izuku Midoriya again, a scared, crybaby boy, alone in a world he didn't know. A powerless man in a universe that might, one day, have gods and monsters of its own. He would be weak. He would be vulnerable. He would be a stranger, a relic, a ghost from a dead world with nothing to offer but his scars. The temptation to say no was a physical force, a tangible weight pressing down on him. He could keep his power. He could remain a god. He could fly back out into the graveyard and live out eternity, as the lonely king of ashes, his power his crown and the voices of the vestiges his court. He would be safe. He would be strong. He would be alone, but he was already alone. But he would be condemning a potential universe of trillions to never exist. He looked at the Genesis Seed, the dark sphere at its heart like a waiting womb. He thought of a new Earth. A new sun rising. Children laughing in a park. A new generation of heroes, inspired by new symbols, fighting for a new future. A future bought with his power, his identity, his very soul. He slowly raised his right hand, the one scarred from 100 battles and 1,000,000% of power. He stared at the faded, web-like scars. This hand had taken the power from All Might. It had fought to protect his friends. It had failed to save a multiverse. Now, it was being asked to give it all away. To become just a hand again. His mind went back to a beach, covered in trash. A scrawny, quirkless boy, dragging a refrigerator. A skeletal man, coughing up blood, yelling at him. If you want this, you'll have to work harder than anyone else. He had worked until his bones broke, until his soul bled. And he had gotten the power. He had become a hero. And now, the final, most heroic act he could perform was to let it all go. To become that quirkless boy all over again. Izuku. Nana's voice was heartbreakingly soft in his mind. There were no more arguments, no strategies. There was only a quiet, profound sadness and an even more profound pride. It's okay. This is a good end. To become the foundation for a new beginning, there is no greater purpose for a hero. We are proud of you. He felt a faint pressure on his shoulder, a ghost of a touch from the vestige of All Might. He felt no sorrow from his mentor's shade now, only a radiant, overwhelming sense of completion. The final lesson. True heroism wasn't about holding on to power. It was about knowing when and how to give it away for the sake of others. Izuku Midoriya, the last hero of the multiverse, looked at the AI construct, deadless. He let his hand fall to his side. The decision felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability, the final page of a story written long ago. His voice, when he finally spoke, was not the growl of a warrior or the cry of a martyr. It was quiet, steady, and filled with a weariness that went beyond bone and muscle, down to the very bedrock of his spirit. Okay, he said, meeting the gaze of the thousand-voiced intelligence. I'll do it. The acceptance was a weight and a liberation all at once. For the first time in an eternity, Izuku Midoriya had a clear mission, a final destination for the screaming supernova of power he carried within his soul. The knowledge that one for all, the sacred torch passed down through 9 generations, would be extinguished to kindle a new universe was a grief too vast to process. So he didn't. He packed it away, locked it in a box in the back of his mind labeled "Field this later." Later, when the work was done. Okay, he had said the word, a final, binding contract. I'll do it. He stood before the glowing form of Deadless, his shoulders squared, ready to be led to the proverbial altar. He envisioned himself placing his hands on the Genesis seed, pouring out his life's energy, and then, fading. A simple, if agonizing, procedure. But the architects, it seemed, had never favored simplicity. Your resolve is the final variable we could only predict, Deadless's harmonic voice stated. The 9th user would not be a warrior, but a savior. The choice to sacrifice, not conquer. Your acceptance confirms the core hypothesis. However, the process is not yet ready to be initiated. Izuku's newfound resolve faltered, replaced by a familiar weariness. Of course not. What's the catch? A complication, not a catch, the AI corrected, its form rippling with illustrative light. The Genesis seed, as it is, will create a universe of perfect physical law. Matter, energy, time, and space will unfold as intended. It will be a stable, functional reality. But it will be sterile. Sterile? Izuku frowned. You said it had the code for life. 4 quirks. It has the potential. But the null did more than destroy physical matter. Its primary nourishment was conceptual. It consumed abstract energies. In its wake, it has left a conceptual vacuum. A universe born now would have physics, but no poetry. It would have biology, but no bravery. It would have neurology, but no love. Life would exist, but it would be a soulless, mechanical existence. A race of beings that would never know hope, never understand sacrifice, and never feel courage. An entire universe of automatons, incapable of becoming more than the sum of their parts. The image Deadless painted was a unique kind of horror. A universe full of people who were not people. A silent, gray existence of the soul, even if the world around them had color. It was the null's final, posthumous victory. So how do we fix it? Izuku asked, his voice low. How do we give them a soul? We cannot give them one, Deadless explained. But we can give them the seeds from which souls can grow. The architects foresaw this. Before they were consumed, they tasked me with a final directive, to locate the last, most potent echoes of the core concepts that define sentient heroism. In the final moments of the multiverse, as countless worlds made their last stands, they burned with conceptual energy so bright that traces of it were left behind, seared into the fabric of their dead realities. These are conceptual shards. They are the lingering psychic residue of the multiverse's greatest virtues. The golden rings around the Genesis seed hummed, and 3 faint, empty sockets glowed on one of the outer rings. The seed must be primed, Daedalus stated. It requires 3 primary conceptual anchors before ignition. 3 shards to form the spiritual foundation of the new reality. They are the strongest remaining echoes we have been able to locate. They are courage, sacrifice, and hope. Izuku listened, a new, daunting path unfolding before him. A quest. A final pilgrimage through the graveyard he had once fled. He had to go back into the dark to gather the last sparks of light. You know where they are, he stated. It wasn't a question. The Nexus's long-range resonance sensors have pinpointed the locations of the 3 most powerful signatures. But be warned, traveler. These places are not merely ruins. They are conceptual battlegrounds. The same event that created the shard also created a psychic wound, a scar tissue of despair. Each shard is protected by a shade, a psychic manifestation of the trauma that birthed the echo. They are not physical entities. They are conceptual guardians born of concentrated failure and fear. More ghosts, Izuku murmured, a grim smile touching his lips. It seemed his work as a grave robber was not yet done. Tell me where to go first. The data on the walls shifted, coalescing into a single, horrifying image. It was a planet, but one that was cracked open like an egg, its molten core exposed to the void. Chunks of its crust, the size of continents, floated in a slow, dead orbit around the ruin. The first target is the Shard of Courage, Daedalus announced. Its echo is located on the husk of a world designated Earth Zero. This was a reality where the entity known as All for One succeeded. He defeated all heroes, consolidated all power, and ruled for a century. His final defeat came not from a single hero, but from the unified, desperate last stand of the entire planet's population, who overloaded their own world's core in a final, suicidal act of defiance. The courage required for every soul on a planet to choose mutual annihilation over submission created an echo of unparalleled intensity. Izuku's blood ran cold. A world where All for One had won. It was the ultimate nightmare scenario that had haunted his own timeline for generations. And the Shade? Izuku asked, his voice tight. The Shade of Earth Zero is the psychic remnant of All for One himself, Daedalus said, its voice a somber chord. Twisted by the null and the planetary agony of his defeat, he is no longer a man, he is a concept. A living embodiment of fear, domination, and the mockery of hope. He will not fight your body, Izuku Midoriya. He will fight your spirit. With the coordinates locked into his scanner, Izuku stood once more at the edge of the Nexus, the shimmering portal humming before him. He felt the vast, pristine silence of the sanctuary at his back, and the cold, dead silence of the graveyard before him. A faint, spectral hand seemed to rest on his shoulder. Be careful, my boy, All Might's voice whispered in his mind, more clearly than it had in years. The ghost of my nemesis is a poison unlike any other. Izuku nodded, a gesture for himself and for the vestiges within. He stepped through the portal. The transition back into the graveyard was just as jarring, a plunge into cold, dark water. He ignited float, stabilizing himself in the void. His scanner guided him, a single vector pointing into the oppressive darkness. He pushed off, a controlled burst of one for all propelling him forward. He could feel it now, the cost. It felt like a slow leak, a fine stream of sand pouring from a crack in his soul. Every use of his power was one step closer to the end of it. He had to be efficient. He flew through the cosmic cemetery, past the silent, crystal figures of Crystallis and the broken rainbow of the Bifrost. This time, their tragedy did not weigh him down. Instead, it fueled him. He was gathering the weapons they no longer could, the very virtues they had embodied. After what felt like an hour, he saw it. Earth Zero. It was worse than Daedalus's image. It was a gaping wound in reality. The shattered planet hung in the void, its innards glowing a dull, angry red. The continental plates that drifted around it were scarred with the ruins of cities, all twisted and corrupted into monstrous shapes, a testament to all for one's century of aesthetic depravity. Spikes of black metal, like thorns, erupted from the dead ground. As he drew closer, he felt it. A psychic pressure, cold and immense. It was the feeling of being watched by a predator, the absolute certainty that you are prey. It was an aura of pure, undiluted dread, and at its heart was a sneering, ancient intelligence. He landed on the largest of the floating continental fragments, a landmass that might have once been Eurasia. His boots crunched on ground that felt like brittle, blackened bone. The ruins of a city stretched before him, its buildings warped into screaming faces and grasping claws. At the center of the ruin was a throne, a grotesque monument made from the fused, melted-down support gear of countless heroes. Helmets, gauntlets, and chest plates were welded into a parody of royalty, and sitting on it was nothing, just empty space. But the feeling of a presence was overwhelming. "You've come a long way, little hero," a voice echoed, not through the air, but directly inside his skull. It was a sound of velvet and venom, a deep, cultured baritone laced with mocking condescension, the voice of All for One. The last little mouse, scurrying through the corpse of creation. "What do you seek in my kingdom of failure?" Izuku's eyes darted around, trying to find the source. "Show yourself," he commanded, his own voice sounding thin against the psychic broadcast. "Show myself? But I am everywhere here. I am in the fear that corroded the spirit of this world. I am in the despair that made them crack their own planet like a nut. And I am in you." The air in front of the throne shimmered, and a figure began to resolve. It was a shifting, glitching silhouette of a man in a dark suit, his head encased in the familiar, skull-like life support mask. But the mask was cracked, and through the cracks seeped not flesh, but pure darkness. His form was unstable, flickering between the image of the man who had fought All Might and the ghostly figures of hundreds of others, the people whose quirks he had stolen, their faces twisted in silent screams. His hands were wreathed in a phantom energy, the dark red and black lightning of his stolen powers, now just memory and shadow. This was the shade. "You reek of him," the shade of All for One sneered, its head tilting. "My foolish little brother's quirk. The sentimental contagion. Passed from one failure to the next, a legacy of loss, culminating in you, the grandest failure of all. The sole survivor. The curator of a dead multiverse. I'm here for the shard of courage," Izuku said, ignoring the taunts. He slipped into a fighting stance, green lightning crackling around him. The shade let out a dry, rasping laugh that scraped against Izuku's nerves. "Courage? There is no courage here. There is only the proof of its futility. They fought with courage, and where did it get them? Their world is dust, their lives are forgotten, and I remain. And you think you can take something from me with force?" The shade's form seemed to swell, the darkness within it deepening. "Your power is useless here, little hero. Your fists can shatter planets, but I am not a planet. I am a truth. I am the final, ugly truth that all heroism is merely a prelude to tragedy. Allow me to show you." Before Izuku could react, the world dissolved. The ruins of Earth Zero vanished, replaced by a scene of unbearable familiarity. The rubble of the Yui training grounds. He was younger, his costume brighter, and lying on the ground in front of him, her body limp and her brown eyes staring blankly at the sky, was Achiko Uraraka. "Why did you leave me, Deku?" Her voice, twisted and hollow, whispered in his mind. "You were so strong. So fast. But not fast enough for me." "No," Izuku gasped, the memory a physical blow. This was from Earth 42, a timeline where Tamura Shigaraki's decay wave had been faster, more absolute. He had been fighting Gigantomachia miles away when it happened. The scene shifted. The burning ruins of Jaka City. A figure in blue armor, his engine sputtering, lay pinned under a mountain of concrete. Ingenium. Ida. "A hero must always follow the rules, Midoriya," Ida's voice, choked with blood and regret, echoed. "The rule was to hold the line. I held it. Where were you? You were our leader. You led us to this." "It wasn't like that." Izuku grunted, shaking his head, trying to fight off the psychic assault. The scene bled into another. A glacier of impossible size shot through with spears of brilliant orange flame. Todoroki. In a world ravaged by elemental beings, he had fought one of fire and one of ice simultaneously, a battle that tore his body apart. I finally accepted both sides of myself, Midoriya, Todoroki's calm, cold voice stated in his mind. But it wasn't enough. I needed my friends. I needed you. Your quest across the stars, was it worth it? The visions came faster, a brutal, relentless montage of his failures. He saw the heroes of other Earths, the bat signal dying over a silent Gotham, the golden towers of Asgard crumbling. Each failure was a nail being hammered into his spirit. Then, the shade delivered its masterstroke. The scene became a war-torn city under a blood-red sky. Explosions bloomed in the distance. And there, facing down a legion of villains, was Bakugo. This was from a world where All for One had returned sooner, more powerful than ever. Still behind me, huh, shitty Deku? The phantom Bakugo snarled, his voice a perfect, agonizing replica. It was filled with the familiar rage, but underneath it was a tremor of fear. For all that power you got from All Might, you're still a step too slow. I'm fighting for my life here, you useless nerd. Where the hell are you? The image zoomed in on Bakugo's face as a blast of dark energy struck him from behind. The surprise. The pain. The final, choked whisper. Deku, stop it! Izuku roared, tears streaming down his face. He clenched his fists, the green lightning of One for All flaring violently. Not yet, the shade of All for One hissed, savoring his pain. We're not done. The grand finale. The world shifted one last time. Kamino Ward. The dust was settling. And there was All Might, his muscle form dissipating like smoke, his arm a withered, useless thing. But this time, it was different. He wasn't victorious. He was on his knees, a hole blasted through his chest, his lifeblood pooling on the ground. The light in his iconic blue eyes was fading into a final, silent question. You took his power, the shade whispered, its voice dripping with false pity. You took his dream. And you led it all to this. To a silent grave. He chose you to be the next symbol of peace, and you became the sole attendant of an infinite cemetery. He told you, you can become a hero. He was wrong. You were not worthy. That broke him. A scream of pure, undiluted rage tore from Izuku's throat. It was the howl of a soul that could bear no more. He poured everything into his legs, launching himself at the shade. I am worthy! He bellowed. He drew back his fist, channeling a concentration of power he hadn't used in centuries. The air itself seemed to bend around his arm. Detroit. Smash! His fist connected with the shade's chest. The impact should have atomized the mountain. Instead, it was like punching smoke. His fist passed through the dark form, and the monumental power of his attack simply vanished. It was absorbed, consumed by the shade. The dark entity laughed, a triumphant, booming sound that shook Izuku to his core. Its form grew larger, darker, fed by the raw, negative emotion behind Izuku's punch. Yes. That's it. The shade boomed. The fear. The rage. The despair. It's delicious. You see? Your strength only makes me stronger. Your struggle only deepens my truth. Give up. Kneel. Accept your failure. Izuku fell to his knees, his arm trembling from the phantom impact. His power was gone, swallowed by the darkness. He was panting, sobbing, utterly defeated. The visions, the taunts, the final, crushing truth, it was too much. The shade was right. He had failed. Everyone was gone. He was alone. And his strength was meaningless. He knelt in the psychic dust, his head bowed, the fight draining out of him. The weight of a trillion ghosts finally pressed him down, and in the quiet of his defeated mind, a soft voice spoke. He's showing you the pain, Izuku. It was Nana Shimura. Her voice was not scolding, not disappointed. It was gentle, a quiet observation. He isn't showing you what you did next. Izuku's head lifted a fraction of an inch. What he did next? The memory of Ochiko's death flashed again. The pain was still there, sharp and brutal. But Nana was right. After he had learned of it, after the grief had torn him apart, what had he done? He hadn't given up. He had used her memory to fuel his resolve, to push himself to travel faster, to warn the next Earth with even more urgency. The memory of Ida. He had died holding the line. And Izuku had honored that sacrifice by learning from it, by improving his own strategies, by ensuring that no line would break like that again if he could help it. Todoroki. Bakugo. All Might. Each loss, each failure, had been a cataclysm. Each one had nearly broken him. But he had taken the pain, the grief, the guilt, and forged it into armor. He had used it as fuel. He had stood up, again and again and again, and kept fighting. The shade was showing him the fall. It was hiding the fact that he had always gotten back up. You're right, Izuku whispered, his voice hoarse. He looked up, not at the shade, but through it. The shade paused its triumphant gloating. What was that? You're right, Izuku repeated, his voice growing stronger. He slowly, painfully, pushed himself back to his feet. I did fail them. I wasn't fast enough for Achiko. I wasn't there for Ida or Todoroki. I was a universe away when Kaken died. He took a step towards the shade, his fists unclenching. There was no lightning crackling around them now. I carry every single one of their deaths, he said, his voice raw but steady. He met the darkness in the shade's mask with his own tear-filled, but now clear, emerald eyes. They are my failures. They are my ghosts. And I would not trade a single one of them, because they are the reason I am still standing here. Their memory is not a weakness, you monster. It's my strength. The shade recoiled as if struck. Lies. Semantics. Your pain is real. Your guilt is undeniable. I'm not denying it, Izuku said, taking another step. I accept it. I accept the pain. I accept the guilt. And I accept the fear. I was terrified every single time. I'm terrified right now. He stopped, standing directly before the towering figure of fear. He felt its oppressive aura trying to crush him, trying to find a crack of doubt to exploit. It found none. You think fear is the end, Izuku said, his voice ringing with a profound, hard-won truth. You think it's a weakness to be purged or a poison to surrender to. But you're wrong. Courage isn't the absence of fear. He raised his head, and a small, sad, but incredibly powerful smile touched his lips. It's looking failure and loss right in the eye, feeling that terror grip your soul, and acting in spite of it. It's choosing to take one more step when every part of you is screaming to run. It's what every hero you're mocking did in their final moments. It's what I have done every single day since the silence began. The effect on the shade was immediate and catastrophic. It was a being made of fear, fed by despair, presented with a hero who did not deny his fear but instead embraced it as a component of his courage. It had nothing to feed on. It was starving. No! No! It shrieked, its voice losing its resonant power, becoming thin and reedy. Its form began to glitch violently, the darkness within it flickering. You lie. You are broken. You are alone. Fear is truth. No, Izuku said calmly. It's just a feeling. And I am not alone. He glanced at his own hands. I have my ghosts. And they're all telling me to stand my ground. With a final, ear-splitting scream of psychic feedback, the shade of all for one destabilized completely. The dark form imploded, collapsing in on itself until it was nothing. The oppressive psychic pressure vanished, leaving behind only the cold, dead silence of the shattered planet. Where the shade had been, a single point of light hovered in the air. It pulsed with a warm, golden glow, pushing back the gloom. Izuku cautiously reached out and took it. It was a physical object, a shard of what felt like solid, warm crystal. It fit perfectly in his palm, and as he held it, he felt not a surge of power, but a quiet, unshakable sense of steadfastness. It was the feeling of planting your feet and refusing to be moved. It was the echo of a planet full of people choosing their end rather than kneeling. It was the shard of courage. He closed his hand around it, the warmth a welcome comfort in the cold. He was emotionally drained, spiritually exhausted. The failed smash had taken a noticeable toll on One for All. The wellspring of power within him felt shallower now. But he had done it. He had faced the embodiment of fear and won, not with his fists, but with his heart. 1 down. 2 to go. He stood for a moment longer in the ruins of All for One's failed empire, holding the first spark of the New World soul. Then, with a deep breath, he turned his back on the darkness and prepared to return to the light.